The room was already tense, the kind of air you could slice with a whisper. A low rumble of voices, camera flashes sparking like tiny bursts of lightning, and a sea of expectant eyes fixed on the stage. Jasmine Crockett stood beneath the harsh white lights, her hand resting near the microphone as she scanned the crowd, mid-sentence, steady, calm. And then, like a storm door slamming open, he barged in. Alex Stein, with that practiced swagger and a glint that didn't reach his eyes. Pushed his way through the aisle, his voice cracking across the hall like a whip. Fake ghetto hood rat, racist toward white people. The words dropped like stones into a quiet pond, sending ripples of shock across the faces that turned toward him. Gasps scattered through the room, a few shouts, a few murmurs, the unmistakable rustle of people leaning in, phones already rising to catch the moment. The microphone squealed, feedback slicing the air as Stein jabbed a finger toward the stage, his other hand waving. A guard stepped forward, but paused when Crockett raised her hand slightly, commanding the room with a look that said, "Let him talk." The cameras zoomed in, social media already alive with hashtags being typed by fast thumbs in the crowd. This wasn't just a meeting anymore. This was a moment. Stein's grin widened, sensing the attention feeding his act. Every twitch of his eyebrow calculated to stir chaos. Crockett inhaled slowly, steadying her voice, her mind working like a chess player's, thinking 3 moves ahead, while the room hung on the edge of eruption. "You think yelling makes you brave?" she said finally, her tone level, almost disarmingly calm. "You think calling names makes you right?" The crowd murmured again, louder this time, the tension teetering between collapse and control. Stein rolled his eyes, theatrically pacing as if the stage were his. "Oh, please," he shot back. "You and your fake outrage. Everyone here knows what you really think." Phones caught every word. Live streams ticked upward. Comments flooded in, some jeering, some cheering, all hungry for the spectacle. Crockett leaned into the microphone, voice now like steel wrapped in velvet. "You came here to make a scene, and you got your spotlight. But this," she gestured to the crowd, to the lights, to the history of the moment, "is bigger than you." Her words sliced cleaner than his insult ever could, the room shifting as if the air itself exhaled. Stein faltered for half a second, just half, but the cameras caught it. And for a heartbeat, the power in the room tilted. The murmurs grew into something like a low tide rolling in. Disapproval, impatience, a hunger for dignity over drama. Someone in the back yelled, "Sit down!" Another voice chimed in, "Let her speak!" Stein looked around, the performance slipping as reality closed in. Crockett straightened her shoulders, her fingers still resting lightly on the microphone, the weight of leadership sitting on her spine like armor. She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She simply held her ground. Outside the room, the internet was already boiling. Clips were being cut mid-sentence, captions written with poison or pride, depending on the agenda. Some would call her a hero. Others would paint her as the villain of their pre-written story. Stein knew this game well. He wasn't here for truth. He was here for virality. And Crockett? She was here for something much heavier. Accountability, justice, the grind of real work beneath the circus lights. A young man in the third row raised his hand, his voice trembling as he spoke. "How do we fix this?" he asked. Not the meeting, but the divide, the poison that turned every conversation into a battlefield. Crockett looked at him, really looked, and for a moment, the noise receded. "We start by talking," she said, "not shouting. And we keep going, even when they try to make a show out of it. It wasn't a headline answer. It wasn't built for retweets. But in that moment, it landed somewhere that mattered. In the room, among the people who still showed up when it was easier not to. The work of mending what had been torn would be slow, maybe invisible at times, but it would be real. And that, she reminded herself, was why she stayed. Some nights, she replayed the incident in her mind, frame by frame. Could she have cut him off sooner? Should she have been louder, softer? The questions came like gnats, buzzing, fleeting, never fully satisfied. In the end, she always came back to the same answer. On the night of the next community forum, there were more cameras, more guards at the door. Some came to listen, some came to bait. Crockett walked in anyway, her notes in hand, the same calm steadiness in her step. Stein did not appear that night, but his echo lingered in the cautious glances, in the murmured jokes at the back row, in the certainty that someone, somewhere, was already live streaming for the thrill of the next viral spark. Crockett's staff urged her to issue a fiery response, to turn the moment into her own clip, a counterpunch for the feeds. She shook her head. "The work speaks louder," she said simply, and turned back to her notes. It was not resignation. It was discipline. The kind that often looks like silence to those who confuse volume with value. The days that followed were a blur of interviews, statements, and security briefings. The footage of Stein's outburst became a case study in how quickly public discourse could be hijacked by those chasing the algorithm rather than the answer. Some blamed the media. Some blamed the politicians. Few paused to ask why such spectacles found fertile ground in the first place. Fear was a currency, and people like Stein knew how to spend it. But beyond the headlines and hashtags, there were quieter stories of people who had come to that meeting to ask real questions about housing, about safety, about education. Their words had been drowned in the uproar, their concerns shelved in the shadow of spectacle. Crockett would call them back, one by one if she had to. She knew their names. She knew their streets. And in the end, that was the difference between a show and a service. Stein, meanwhile, was already drafting his next viral clip. In a rented car, under flickering gas station lights, he scrolled through his mentions, tallying the spikes in followers and invitations to podcasts that thrived on outrage. "Mission accomplished," he murmured to no one, uploading his own edited version of the night, framed just enough to make him look like the victim of some imagined tyranny. His fans would eat it up. They always did. Morning headlines told the story before breakfast was even served. Screens flashed Stein's insult in bold, cropped to sting, while Crockett's full statement rarely made the cut. Talk shows circled like vultures, some defending the disruption as bravery, others calling it performance activism. The truth, as always, sat somewhere in the quiet middle, overlooked by those who preferred the noise. Crockett, brushing the tiredness from her eyes, prepared for another day. Not for the cameras, but for the work that had started long before the chaos, and would continue long after the trending tags faded into yesterday's arguments. That night, as the city hummed with late news and online noise, she sat alone in her office for a moment longer than usual. The echo of his words still lingered, sharp as glass, but already dulling at the edges. She thought of the people who had come in good faith, who still believed in something bare, and she felt the weight of their eyes on her. Not with expectation, but with quiet trust. It was enough to keep going. The meeting resumed, but the ripples would not fade easily. Outside, News vans were already forming a crooked line along the curb, their satellite dishes stretching toward the clouds like hungry mouths. Hashtags continued to multiply. Opinion pieces were being drafted before the final gavel even struck. Crockett knew the narrative would split in two, hero to some, target to others. But she had long ago learned that leadership was not about universal applause. Crockett finally stepped forward, her shadow cutting across the front row. "You had your say," she declared. And for the first time, her voice carried the full weight of the room. "Now let's get back to the truth." Applause erupted. Not wild, but steady, like a heartbeat returning after a scare. Stein scowled, turned, muttered something under his breath about free speech as if it had been stolen from him, and began to back away toward the doors he had stormed through. A reporter whispered into a phone, their editor barking instructions. "Get the headline up now! Don't wait!" Across the hall, a mother covered her child's ears, shaking her head at the chaos of it all. Stein raised his voice again, louder this time, trying to reclaim the moment slipping through his fingers. "You're destroying this country!" he shouted, arms wide, face flushed with either anger or performance. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. Colleagues asked if she planned to pursue legal action or push for stricter controls at public meetings. She declined. "We can't build stronger communities by closing the doors tighter," she said. It wasn't naivety. It was principle. The openness that allowed a heckler to shout was the same openness that allowed a citizen to plead, to question, to hope. Her aides sometimes worried that this patience would be mistaken for weakness. "Let them think that," she said. "I'd rather be underestimated than unseen." The work was slow, deliberate, often thankless. But it was building something bigger than clicks. It was building trust, brick by brick, even when someone else came to tear down the scaffolding for a few seconds of fame. In quiet hours, long after the staff had gone home, she would draft letters to constituents. Real people with real needs. They didn't care for theatrics. They wanted streetlights fixed, schools funded, neighborhoods heard. She kept those letters stacked neatly on her desk, a counterweight to the noise. A proof that even in the loudest storms, there was still a place for steady hands and listening ears. Sometimes, when the hall was empty, she would walk the same aisle where Stein had stood, tracing the path of his interruption. It was an odd ritual, but it kept the night real. Not just a clip or a headline, but a moment lived, felt, and endured. Leadership, she reminded herself, was not about erasing the storms. It was about walking back into the same room and choosing to speak anyway. Reporters eventually stopped calling. Producers found new controversies to feed the cycle. Yet the memory of that night remained like a watermark on every future meeting. A reminder of how fragile focus can be in a world wired for distraction. Crockett carried it quietly, neither hiding nor brandishing it. There were bigger battles ahead, policies to pass, lives to improve, and she refused to let a moment of theater define the measure of her service. Stein's followers moved on too, some disappointed that he hadn't pushed further, others eager for his next spectacle. The internet, like a river after rain, carried debris quickly away. But every so often, a clip would resurface, stripped of context, framed anew by someone else's agenda. Crockett learned to live with that too. It was part of the price of showing up. Weeks later, the clip had already faded into the scroll of the internet, replaced by newer outrages, fresher wounds. But in the district office, the work continued. Meetings with parents, late-night calls with community leaders, budget drafts that would never go viral. Stein was on to his next stunt, somewhere else, another crowd, another target. But the people who mattered, the ones who lived there, remembered who stood still in the storm.